what I'm wearing looks good, therefore I am worthwhile and can take part of this conversation.
Right.
When really, why are we complimenting somebody's shoes when we meet them? So today we're going to be talking about self-esteem and body image. And Maddie's here as a woman, by definition, an expert on self-esteem and body image.
Thank you, Liat. I can't believe I'm considered an expert, but I'm really excited for today's conversation.
Okay, so I think we need to start with definitions because when I look at both of those concepts, the definitions to me don't seem necessarily to be connected, but we know that they are very much connected. So self-esteem is how we perceive ourselves and value ourselves, and body image is our subjective perception of how we look and how we're viewed by others.
Right.
And so the question is, why are those two elements so interwoven in who we are?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, because I feel like self-esteem in some ways is a much broader topic than just body image, but body image, as you said, plays a huge role. And I think that we tend to think of what does our body look like, this sort of physical being, and that's how a lot of times we are then defining our self-worth or looking at our self-esteem. And it's a complex question, because if you look at the definitions, they do seem quite separate. It's about sort of ability and maybe more like skill sets as self-esteem, whereas body image is very individualistic of what one individual perceives about themselves. So I think that I know we'll dive into all the specifics, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we can easily see our bodies. And whether it's when you're looking in a mirror or you're walking down the street and that's what you observe of other people, you see their hair length and color, you see what they're wearing, you see how they're holding themselves. It becomes this kind of initial, really truly surface level way of seeing another person, judging another person, but then also doing that to yourself. So when you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror, you're seeing, how does your skin look? How does your hair look? You know, maybe you're a little tired, so there's bags under your eyes. Those are the things that you get to first notice, which then feeds into your self-esteem or how you're feeling in that day.
So our whole day is focused on the externals of how we look and how other people perceive us. It's interesting. I think it starts from a really young age. Like, I know when people have come to visit my family, and they're introduced to my children. So when they're introduced to a daughter, they will automatically say, "It's so nice to meet you. You're so beautiful." And when they're introduced to a son, they would say, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you. You know, do you want to go play outside?"
They're not saying he's so handsome.
No, even though, of course, they really are.
Of course.
And I think so that stereotype is almost like pushed into women's minds when they're still girls. And I just think it would be amazing if really everybody was introduced to a child and, you know, said, "Oh, so nice to meet you. Do you want to share with me the last book that you've read?"
Mm-hmm.
And then we would be on a much more equal playing field.
Right.
But I think that from a very young age, we're already taught that our self-perception and how our acceptance by others is based on externals.
Right. Well, right. That's what's hard is how do you, what do they say? Like, it takes, your first impressions are everything. And, you know, within 5 seconds, someone has already created an impression in their mind of who you are. And I think that has to do with your external portrayal. So again, this could be just like what you're wearing, but it could also be just some of your more natural features that are affected by genes and biology and all of that. But it does seem like women have, there's much more of a discerning eye when it comes to women and their external looks versus men. Because like you said, you don't go up to the little boys and say, "Oh, wow, you're so cute," or "I love your shoes." Like, that's a thing. Even with my nephew, I feel like I'm so rarely, I think he's a beautiful child, and yet I'm not commenting on his looks. But I see my friends who have daughters, and I'm like, oh my God, she's so pretty. Look at her eyes. Look at her hair. You kind of focus on those features.
Right. I think we do it as adults also. I'm just thinking about it. And I realize that when we meet somebody and we want to say something positive, we want to say, oh, you're great. So when we meet them, we're always looking. Well, certainly I, and I feel other people, hopefully, when looking at me as well. But you see somebody and you say, oh, so nice to meet you. Wow, your handbag is so beautiful. Or I really like this sweater. Like, we'll comment on external things of that person. And we think, wow, we're being so good about this because we're really upping their self-esteem. But I think subconsciously what's happening is we're actually, again, tying in that self-esteem with their body image, so that the feeling is, oh, what I'm wearing looks good, therefore I am worthwhile and can take part of this conversation.
Right.
When really, why are we complimenting somebody's shoes when we meet them? Because that has nothing to do with the conversation that we're about to have. Even though I'm sure your shoes are fabulous, but
thanks.
I can't really.
They're just sneakers today.
See them.
But also it's I think what then happens in addition to that is if someone is used to constantly being complimented on these external factors, then the absence of it can even feel more significant. So if, for example, if every time I walk into your house, you comment on my dress or, I look really nice, and then one day you don't, oh, do I not look good today? Am I wearing, is there a stain on my shirt? Or did I put on weight? Is my hair out of sorts? Like, there's all these questions that start to come up, which then I think that's what can fuel the self-esteem, the erosion of the self-esteem.
Right. Well, I think we're so easily influenced by those externals, and then our inner voice, which should really be our strength, telling us you are worthwhile, you have what to add to this conversation, your input in this project is important. Instead, it gets stifled by the external messages, and sometimes they're even that subjective message by like what wasn't said, when it was like, oh, how come they didn't say that? Wait a second, do I look okay? Is this all right? And then we become our own worst enemy because our inner voice is putting us down all the time instead of building us up.
Right. And do you think that we equate elements of body image with that self-worth? So, for example, if I don't think I look a certain way, that means I'm not smart, capable, able to succeed. Like, is there that connection to the way I look and the way that I can navigate the world?
Well, I think the messages that we get from society are really those more, maybe actually also more subjective. I think we're trying to talk the talk more than we were in the past, but we're definitely not walking the walk yet. So we still have supermodels who are all super skinny, Miss Universe, who in theory would be the role model for us all. It's all based on externals and her swimsuit catwalk.
Right.
And so the messages like that we're getting are that, yes, if you want to be successful, then your actions are going to have to be backed up with an external as well. And so it becomes really intertwined, where we feel that only if we're externally pleasing, if we're beautiful, if we're skinny enough, if our hair is exactly the way it's meant to be, then we'll be accepted, and then what we say will be worthwhile.
Right. Just one more thing on that. I feel like I remember when I got my first job after college, and I had never had a corporate job, so I had to go shopping to buy, the right business attire. And I remember thinking that, to me, as a 22-year-old entering the workplace, some of the stuff felt so not me, the clothing I was buying. And I remember that so many people said, dress for the job you want to have, not the job you have. And so it's like, okay, if I want to be a executive or, a leader of a company, I should dress like that. So then I was looking at these images of like very formal business women, and even thinking about what the men look like who are in suits and, dressing a certain way. And the idea was like, oh, if I put that on, if I adopt that external clothing and attire that will somehow fuel my inner ability to get there. But I think that I remember feeling really weird in that situation because it didn't agree with who I felt like I was. It felt like I wasn't able to externally express my identity and my unique qualities and even some of my internal abilities, which were maybe less corporate and more like creative and artistic. I wasn't showing that. So someone could look at me and say, oh, wow, this is a really serious person, and not recognize that there's actually a kind of crazier artistic side to me because I was wearing all, very traditional conservative business attire.
Well, I think that's really interesting. Takes us into the topic really of what we wear and how that affects the confidence that we exude to others and also the perception that they have of us. There's definitely a concept of dressing for success, of power shoes, of, those elements that would make us be more conceptually more successful in the business world, but then negate other aspects of ourselves that we can't express.
And who decided those?
Right. Well, now we have Dress Down Fridays. So there's at least one day that people can show a different side of themselves. But I don't know how much of how we show ourselves to others is really who we are, and how much of it is what we think they want us to be. So like you're saying, if I want to be accepted in a corporate world, then I'll dress more corporate. But if I'm part of the creative team, then I get to dress in a way that shows that there's a creative side of me. So there's a lot of what we want to project to others in the way that we dress. Mm-hmm. But I think the prerequisite to that has to be that we actually have to know ourselves in order to know what we have to project outwards. And I think that our knowledge of self is often not clear. So we end up wearing what we think other people want us to wear and looking in a way that we think other people want us to look, as opposed to who we really are inside.
Right. So if self-esteem has to do with recognizing our own worth and ability and recognizing who we are inside, but we're so, in some ways we drive our self-esteem based on our body image and the way that we put our body in the world, it's like this kind of a catch-22, because we're going to the gym and buying the clothes and doing all these things based on this perception of, or this aspirational sense of self, because if we look a certain way, then that will reflect back on who we are. And yet we need to know who we are in order to figure out how, or be comfortable with our body image, or know how we want to dress, or know, what feels good in our physical being.
Right. So I really, what I wish is that every woman would be strong enough to, first of all, know that she is beautiful, and secondly, to really be able to interact with the world with the confidence that shows that she knows her own self-worth.
Right.